Caribbean. Without further ado, I know Professor Moore has to leave. He has double duties this afternoon. So we're going to just invite Dr. Christina Hines to give welcome remarks. She's the head of the Department of Government, Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology. Yes, a mouthful from the UE campus. Okay, thank you, Dr. Hines.
Deputy Principal Professor Winston Moore, esteemed workshop and panel participants, guests, ladies, gentlemen, those listening online, welcome to this evening's proceedings. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Department of Government, Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology. Yes, it is a long name, and the reason is because we are an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary department, and I think that this evening's panel discussion reflects who we are as a department, and it is most fitting that we are able to welcome such an esteemed panel of persons from Latin America, from the UK, as well as the workshop participants to speak and engage on this topic of energy justice. I like the in brackets. It's an interesting play, right? Because we can think about injustice and we can think about injustice. So how are we grappling with the energy issues of our time? And we know that one of the biggest issues that we face today, challenges, perhaps existential crises, is climate change and all that is related to climate change. And as people located in small island developing states across the region, we know how real the crises, the multiple crises that emerge from climate change can be. We also have a lot of energy in this region from ourselves, from the sun, from the sea. So it is a most fitting discussion to have, especially when people think that these discussions related to climate change and energy are technical matters for the natural scientists, those who are involved in solar energy, maybe some like Professor Moore, the economists. But there are so many elements to addressing climate change. Your moderator today, Dr. Deborah Joseph, approaches this topic in her own work in social work. The social elements of this, issues to do with the elderly, with young people, during the COVID-19 pandemic, how this intersected with COVID-19. So I am very happy that the Department of Government, Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology here at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, has had this opportunity to partner with the Energy Solidarity in Latin America Network through the University of Glasgow. And I welcome you all to listen with rapt attention and ask some poignant questions of our panelists when that moment arises. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hines, for that welcome. Okay, everybody is saying energy justice, energy justice. What is energy justice? So let me give just a brief overview. Energy justice is a framework that addresses the fair distribution of both the benefits and burdens of energy production and consumption. It encompasses ensuring that all people, regardless of race, income, or geographic location, have access to affordable, reliable, and clean energy. The concept also involves recognizing and rectifying inequalities in the energy sector that affect marginalized and vulnerable populations. So just briefly, let me give you the key principles of energy justice. We have distributive justice, procedural justice, recognition justice, restoration justice, And let's look at, see, the impact of energy justice on society. We see environmental and health benefits because of this. We see economic equity. We see social inclusion. And we see climate resilience and policy and governance. I hope that brief overview will give you an idea what we are going to be discussing this evening. Okay, now for some ground rules, I'm going to introduce the panelists, all of them, and they're going to be followed by opening remarks. Each one of them going to have some opening remarks, and then we'll have some guided questions. The opening remarks is about 5 minutes, if you can, 3 to 5 minutes. And then the guided questions is about 12 minutes each. All right? So those are the housekeeping rules. All right? Panelists? Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce Professor Winston Moore. Professor Winston Moore is currently a professor of economics and the deputy principal of the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus. His research interests include the green economy, private sector development, and the economic impact of climate change on tourism. Very important subject. Professor Moore has authored over 100 peer-reviewed papers, books, and book chapters. Among the most highly cited works are The Impact of Climate Change on Caribbean Tourism Demand, published in Current Issues in Tourism, so you all can have a look at that. The Tourism Area Life Cycle, Regime, Switching Models in Annals of Tourism Research, another place that you can look for that article, and Foreign Direct Investment and Tourism in SIDS, Evidence from Panel Causality Tests in Tourism Analysis. So there's where you'll find some of the articles from Professor Winston Moore. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Surrey, an MSc in economics from the University of Warwick, and a BSc in economics from the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. Professor Moore can be reached via email at winston.moore@cavehill.ue.edu. Okay, thank you. Welcome, Professor Moore. And you will do your presentation now. Thank you.
I think there's a nice slide presentation that I have to utilize in the next 5 minutes. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here to do this presentation. I'm always honored and happy when I get invited to do presentations because it allows me to get out of my office and stop doing emails and doing reports, but I can actually become an economist again. So this is like a really good thing for me. Now, I'm going to approach this from the perspective of economists in relation to looking at the issue of energy justice and energy injustice issues. And there are probably like 3 key takeaways that I'd like you to have from my presentation. Because whenever we speak about energy justice, there's some macro, micro issues that are very peculiar to small island developing states. So I'm going to flag those for you this evening. But first, let's look at energy in Caribbean SIDS. And one of the fundamental characteristics of SIDS is that they're highly isolated. So you had to fly a couple hours to Barbados from your home countries. And this is a characteristic for most small island developing states. They're isolated, or they're probably surrounded by an ocean. Now compare this to countries in Europe. Countries in Europe, you could potentially buy electricity from your neighbor. So a lot of European countries would have been purchasing electricity from Russia prior to the recent conflict that took place there. And it is something that is very common within larger, more developed countries. But in small island developing states, you have to be self-sufficient in the production of your electricity. So this means you actually have to build in redundancies. So if our demand for electricity is 100 megawatts, very small number, just give you an example. You therefore have to building redundancies that maybe double that amount, because if, for example, you have a spike in electricity demand, you have to be able to fulfill the demands of consumers. The other thing about small and developing states is that they are very dependent on fossil fuels for generating electricity. Barbados has a very aggressive target for renewable energy, which I'm going to mention a little bit later on, but we're still largely dependent on fossil fuels to generate electricity. And what that therefore means is that crude oil prices and the prices for fossil fuels has a significant impact on the cost of electricity and the cost of producing electricity in small and developing states. So this is like the lay of the land. This is the characteristics of SIDS and some of the things that you'll need to be aware of. If you look at the import statistics, you'll see that we probably spend almost this is like 1 in every $5 on imports is spent on crude oil or fossil fuels in Barbados. So it's like 20% of every dollar of imports is spent on fossil fuels. So it's a significant drain on the foreign exchange reserves for Barbados. So if you're looking at one way that we could potentially make the balance of payments or reduce our use of foreign exchange in Barbados is essentially to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels. It also shows up in electricity prices. So at the bottom of the chart, you'll have some more developed countries. So United States, Singapore, they're paying around 18 cents. This is in US dollars, 18 cents per kilowatt. But you'll see that small island states in the Caribbean are paying more than twice that amount. So Barbados, we're paying around 29 cents per kilowatt, and Jamaica around 32 cents per kilowatt. For electricity. So not only do we have to invest in more capacity, we're actually paying more in terms of electricity prices. We're hoping that these figures come down over the next couple of years, and I'll tell you why we're hoping this is the case. Now, this is the aggressive target that we have for renewable energy in Barbados. We have a target to be 100% free of fossil fuels by 2030. It's an aggressive target because we are not quite close there at this point in time, but it's a target that you can see would have a number of benefits, because the first benefit would be in terms of the use of foreign exchange. I told you that we're spending a lot of money on foreign exchange. So if you can wean yourself off of fossil fuels, it would immediately save in terms of foreign exchange usage. Secondly, these are new industries that are going to be popping up in Barbados. So we have a number of our tertiary level education institutions that are training persons to repair electric vehicles, to install photovoltaic systems. These are new jobs and new industries that are going to pop up in Barbados. So these are going to have really nice spillover effects for the country in terms of economic activity and new jobs. So it has some significant benefits that we're looking to obtain from this 2030 target. We've been doing really well in terms of the installation of solar PV. We're very much ahead of our target in terms of solar PV. We aren't doing as well in terms of our installation of wind energy, as well as the storage. The storage is the key constraint for the greater utilization of renewable energy in Barbados. The government of Barbados recently announced a plan for greater investment in storage, but if we can get the amount of storage that we have on the plant up, we can therefore accommodate a lot more renewable energy in Barbados. Now, this is where I get into the issues in terms of the economic injustice issues that I want you to take away from this presentation. The first one, we did a survey of Barbadians to get their views and their perceptions in relation to the renewable energy goals. So every Barbadian knows the targets and the goals in terms of renewable energy, but there then tends to be a little bit of a knowledge gap in relation to their knowledge of renewable energy and how it could impact on them. So one of the things that many Barbadians said is that they thought renewable energy was too costly. So purchasing a PV system for your house, purchasing a solar water heater system was considered too costly. And I say that this is a knowledge gap because if you look at the regime that we have in Barbados, the tax regime is actually quite conducive to purchasing these items. So you can walk into most commercial banks as well as credit unions, and you can say, I would like to install a PV system on my rooftop. Credit union or the commercial bank would size a system for you that would essentially be equivalent to your electricity bill. And all you have to do is repay that same amount that you'll pay on your electricity bill to the bank or the credit union. So you therefore don't have to have the cash to invest in these things. But this, however, is one of the areas that there's another aspect of this, however, that we have to consider. Even though you don't have to have the cash, you do have to have the collateral. So a credit union or a bank is not going to lend to you unless you have some collateral to show that you can repay the loan. So therefore, you have a little bit of the energy and justice issues there because lower income individuals are therefore less likely to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. There's also another aspect of energy and justice that I wanted to flag as well, the tax regime, particularly in relation to income tax regime. So the income tax regime is very conducive. It's very conducive to investing in renewable energy. But you first have to have the cash. So you could write off $10,000 per year for investing in any renewable energy system in Barbados. So if your RE system, if you get a 5 kilowatt system, it's probably going to cost you like $21,000. You write off that over 2 years, and it's a good return on your investment for most middle class and high income individuals. For low income individuals, there's a little bit of a problem because you don't have that cash to invest in the system. The other issues in terms of injustice issues largely relate to the life cycle problems, and the persons in the survey indicated that they considered the life cycle cost of solar panels a significant issue for us in small and developing states. What are we going to do with the solar panels after the 25 years when they're no longer useful? That is an issue that we will have to consider in the future, and the disposal aspect of issues is something we have to consider. There's also a third aspect of energy injustice that I want to flag that only gets spoken about amongst economists, and that is the transition to renewable energy. So at the moment, we get around $200 to $250 million in tax revenue from taxing fossil fuels. If you transition to all renewable energy, that means you're going to be losing that same amount of money in terms of tax revenues. So even though you have this really great goal in mind in terms of transitioning to renewable energy, it has an impact on SIDS because SIDS tax fossil fuels as a means of financing their budget deficits. And this is also a characteristic that is very peculiar to SIDS. Yeah? So in looking ahead, I don't want to take up too much time. Looking ahead, there are a couple of issues that we'll need to be focused on in small and developing states. It's the communication or the messaging issue. I don't think we've done a really good job in relation to this, and we're going to have to work a bit more on this. The financing issue is we're doing a good job in terms of financing for middle income, high income individuals, but there's also a macro issue that we need to take care of. How do we get the financing for SIDS to develop more or invest more in wind energy? Because wind energy is a really great opportunity for SIDS, but we really don't have the investment at a macro level to invest in SIDS. And then one final thing is the regulatory environment. I think Barbados is a good example of a country that has made a particularly really great investment in terms of its regulatory environment, but it's an area that is still quite lacking in most SIDS. And so we're going to have to continue to work in this area in relation to other small and developing states, making sure that if I invest in a system today, that the return on my investment is guaranteed so that my return on investment doesn't drop immediately as a result of a change in the regulatory regime. So I'm going to end here, and thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you so much, Professor Moore, for that presentation. And we know that Barbados is making strides in renewable energy, and we congratulate them. Our next panelist I will introduce is Professor Harriet Thompson. And without Professor Harriet Thompson and Dr. Alana Griffith, we wouldn't be here today. So we thank them. Harriet Thompson is a professor of energy, sustainability, and inequality at the University of Glasgow, an honorary professor at the University of Birmingham. She has wide-ranging interests in the area of energy research and social science, including socially just transitions to net zero, energy communities, and energy poverty. Her disciplinary training is in social policy. She has a BA, Master of Research, and PhD from the University of York. And her work primarily focuses on Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And she regularly consults for organizations such as the United Nations, G20, and the European Commission. So without further ado, we'll invite Professor Harriet Thompson to give her opening remarks and her presentation to this evening. Welcome.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that introduction, Deborah. And thank you for hosting me this week with such kindness. And I've had some really, really fascinating discussions so far. We've had a fantastic day one of our workshop this morning. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow, day two. So I guess just to sort of give a little bit of background on the work that I've been doing. So I will obviously be reflecting from a very European perspective. So a lot of the work I do is in a sort of European context. But as Deborah's already mentioned, our kind of main impetus for being here today is as part of a broader international project, Energy Solidarity in Latin America. It started off with a focus on Colombia, Cuba, and Mexico, and we've sort of gradually each year since 2020 we've been expanding out. We've got collaborators now in kind of Brazil, Argentina, in Panama, and now more latterly we're kind of expanding out and building partnerships here in Barbados. So I think the opening slides by Winston really set the scene, so I think I won't kind of repeat what you know, kind of some of the key energy injustices in particularly in Barbados are, but what I'd like to sort of talk on and perhaps expand on in questions later on is this idea of community energy, so citizen-led energy. So I think one thing that's really come through in the discussions earlier today with quite a mixed group of people was the need to move towards decentralized forms of renewable energy, and particularly for that to be closer to people to move to a prosumer kind of model. And that's an area of work I've been doing quite a lot on recently. We've just concluded a pan-European Horizon 2020 project, Community Energy for Energy Solidarity. And within that, we were looking at 6 different existing energy communities, or community energies, there's a lot of flipping around of the words, across Europe from 4 different countries. And our focus there was really thinking about how can you scale up these typically kind of smaller initiatives. So there's a real, I guess community energy is a real buzzword in Europe at the moment. Everyone's so excited it's going into all the European legislation. We're like, this is the panacea, it's going to fix everything, community energy. And we're like, okay, maybe let's calm down and just kind of work through this a little bit more and be a bit more realistic. You know, it's I think in the UK probably less than 5%, maybe less than 1% of the total electricity demand is actually met currently by small-scale renewable, cooperatively kind of community-owned systems. So it's relatively small when we compare it to kind of these bigger transnational energy companies. And basically we worked through these existing energy companies to communities switching good practices that they had, seeing how it would transfer to different contexts, different countries, and ultimately how we could scale that up and what the kind of key barriers would be. And perhaps unsurprisingly, especially based on some of the questions we've had today, the number one problem, well, not number one, but a key problem is funding. financing. Everything comes back to the kind of financing question. So perhaps no surprises that we also struggle a lot with that, the upfront costs of the systems, particularly when the ideas of community energy are based in kind of democratic, cooperative models. We're not trying to kind of necessarily generate a huge profit for a corporation. It's really about community-owned assets. So that creates a lot of issues. But there are some really good examples where people can buy in. They each buy a share of, say, a community-owned wind turbine or a solar panel. So that was definitely one problem. And a different one, I think it was interesting that you mentioned around kind of training of kind of people to work on EVs, because we definitely found a big skills gap. So when we're thinking about, okay, if we take this down to the local level, then that means we need hundreds or thousands of sort of groups where they have to cover a really broad range of different skills. They need to be able to apply for funding, they need to be able to manage accounts, they need to manage a team of volunteers or of paid staff. They need to be able to work through procurement systems, to identify appropriate technologies for their community, go through the whole installation process, and then maintain it. And by the time you've added all of that up, you've got quite a diverse kind of skill set. And that's a real big issue that we're finding, is that obviously not every single community has all of those skills readily available. And related to that, a lot of these kind of initiatives really do depend on volunteers. And so there's a real risk of quite high and sometimes sudden turnover of people kind of stepping back. And it can also be quite overwhelming. You're kind of doing something voluntarily and you're suddenly having to apply for funding or manage things that are outside of your natural kind of wheelhouse. So those are a lot of issues that we're kind of finding. And then beyond that, just a lot of regulatory problems. And that seemed to be something that was really shared in this region as well, where we just don't have public policies, we don't have the kind of governance frameworks to support this kind of future that we want, where there is a decentralized, clean energy-based kind of future. So that's sort of just the main things that were kind of coming out, and it was interesting, there was a lot of parallels there, but I'll wrap up and say thanks again for the welcome, and looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you so much, Professor Thompson, for that synopsis. Thank you. Our next panelist is Dr. Carla Sedano Villavicencio. She is a multidisciplinary academic leader in the field of energy, innovation, and sustainability with a gender perspective. Very important. Carla is head of the Innovation and Futures Lab at the Institute of Renewable Energies, National Autonomous University of Mexico. She completed postgraduate studies in computer science and genomic medicine, and she holds a PhD in engineering and applied sciences with a specialty in materials. So without further ado, I welcome Dr. Sedano. Yes. Yes. Okay.
Oh, Dios mío. Thanks for the hospitality, and it's been a pleasure being with you. So I will talk to you a little bit. I'm from Mexico, as you have heard, and I will be very brief talking about this triad: energy poverty, renewable energies, and community-level solutions. So that's what we've been working with, and I want to especially focus on this proposal about decentralizing renewable energy. That's the main, let's say, advantage of renewable energy, especially variable renewable energy, solar, wind, the one that is locally generated and can be locally seized. So basically, gender mainstreaming is a big issue. So I will speak to you about a couple of projects that we've been working on and that take these things into consideration. And that World Energy Transitions Outlook that Irena made is really interesting. So I would certainly recommend everybody to have a look at it. We had a project that its main focus was to work community level in peri-urban spaces, because peri-urban spaces are common to our regions, where it's not a kind of very developed urban space, but not a rural space. It's a transition between both type of territories. And there, at least in my country, there are a lot of informal businesses, and we can see that in Latin America. Informal businesses in the household level that normally are women-led, no? So there is a lot of struggles there. So we work with them, and we try to empower those women with knowledge on solar energy and on business and on accounting models, and they transform the way they did their informal businesses. One had a small restaurant, informal restaurant. Another made tamales, a traditional food from my country, and she sells them. And another one dehydrates plants to make cosmetics. So instead of doing them with gas, they transformed it by solar dehydrators, by a PV panels for the one who makes tamales, and the little restaurant, the informal restaurant, was in the COVID pandemic, had a lot of struggles because she had to sterilize things. So heating water to do so was very expensive, the use of gas. So she installed a solar thermal collector. So it solved her life. It was a very interesting experience, and we work on those things, and we could see differences. Conceptually, the whole idea was empowerment. We thought first on community empowerment, but we found out that women were just getting in front and were most interested and engaged. So the survivals of the experiment were women-led informal businesses, which is also a common part in Latin America. And what we did is get, let's say, outside the box, not a traditional approach top-down. It was not even bottom-up. We tried to be the academia like a mean to work with the community. We tried to do it not from a vertical point of view, but of trying to engage with them, ask them what they needed, and that's the way the project was finally led. So that was in peri-urban spaces. And thanks to Newton Fund in Mexico's CONACYT, we worked with Harriet Thompson's team. And we did this other project that's called CAPAS, and this one was made in the rural spaces, and we work with households. So basically, we did lower carbon technology installations, but before that, we worked on energy literacy at the household space. But it was also in pandemic times. We had COVID. So we had to work with WhatsApp-based research activities remotely. And the whole family was invested in understanding energy and taking energy diaries, and this was made thanks to this very social-oriented way of doing things. We had a mediator as part of the team, a couple of them, designing workshops to make families talk together and talk and think about energy in their livelihoods. So with all of this, we installed technologies, and then we monitored the most significant change they could report based on that. We did measure the energy poverty using a three tiers approach. We of course saw the economic space. We also saw the households monitor. We had physical variables monitoring, but we also make a consensual approach. We were trying to see how people understood energy poverty and how that energy poverty in the household was felt before and after the installations of the technology. And most importantly, we think that this project fought myths, prejudice, and stigmatizations around energy, because normally something that happens in our countries is somebody thinks that we need solar panels and they just give solar panels to the communities, and that doesn't solve anything. Or they think that they're misusing the technology because they use it for watching soap operas in the TV, and they say, they should be using for educational purposes, and it's like, well, who are we to say what do people should use technology for? So we learned a lot. We also understood the social fabric be inside the households. And I have this final statement to say and finish my conversation with. Energy transformation, and that's what we learned with the communities, should be just, should be sustainable, but most importantly, it has to be inclusive, or it won't happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sidano, for that. And I hope we could replicate the measuring of energy poverty in our Caribbean islands and seek to fight myths, prejudice, and stigmatization throughout the Caribbean. Thank you for that presentation. Now we move on to Engineer Rosalina Lindo Riggs. She is the former National Secretary of Energy for Panama. She has been the climate change negotiator for Panama, chair and vice chair of the Forum of Designated National Authorities of the Clean Development Mechanism of Latin America, and, among other things, has collaborated with international agencies and organizations such as the Franconian Energy Agency, Germany. Rosalina has a Bachelor in Civil Engineering from the Universidad Tecnológica de Panama, an MSc in Environmental Science, Renewable Natural Resources, and Environmental Management from the Universidad Autónoma de San Luis Potosí, and an MSc in Technology, Renewable Energy, Environment, and Resource Management in the Tropics and Subtropics from Cologne University of Applied Sciences. Oh, thank you for gracing us with your presence today, and I welcome you to do your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very excited today to be here because being in the #1 place in the world that is using more solar water heaters per capita is an honor, really. And for a while, I have been inspiring the policy making in Panama through the things that you are already doing here in Barbados. So thank you for the legacy. So first of all, I would like to highlight that we cannot have a energy justice without thinking the role, the service that sustainable energy do for us. More than saving CO2 emissions, more than generating new jobs, there is a job that is performing, and we are looking forward to continue performing that is saving our health. In the last carbon zero analysis that the UN Environment Program did, it evaluate the potential of savings by implementing a full renewable energy transition in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the potential saving in US dollars is 30,000 million US dollars. And if we are talking about finding resources, by saving the health budget, we will find the resources. Also, Dr. Moore said at the beginning of his presentation that the price of electricity is very high. By implementing the energy transition in Latin America and the Caribbean, we can save up to here to 2050 more than 223 billion US dollars just by using, as you already decided, the sun, the wind, in our daily activities. That is very important to have in mind, not only for saving the planet, but saving our health. And in the middle of a situation that we have been seeing the increase of respiratory diseases, not only COVID-19, a lot of different new diseases are there. We need to save our respiratory system. But talking about energy justice, we need to talk about how we are assuring to have an honest conversation with the different stakeholders everywhere. And in order to have an honest conversation, you have not only, as people usually said, leaving no one behind. You have to bring everybody in the conversation, in the decision-making process, in the creation of knowledge. And that's why in Panama, during the process of designing the National Energy Transition Agenda, we create a new framework of governance for the energy transition. We create something that we call the National Energy Transition Commission, where the public sector is represented, the private sector is represented, the academia is also represented there, but the users of energy, not only electricity, but also liquid fuels are present in this commission in order to evaluate and to follow up the implementation of the 66 lines of actions. But do not stop there. We create every commission, official commission, to work on the implementation of the distributed generation strategy, the universal access to energy strategy, the electromobility strategy, including the national banks to assure the creation of new financial mechanisms. And also, we open a clear discussion on how to reuse the subsidies for electricity and the subsidies for fossil fuel in the transport sector. And one of the things that I always like to highlight and compare is that, as an example, in Panama, we provide $150 million in subsidies for the electricity sector, and we are implementing a new program not to subsidize the electricity, but the families that consume less than 300 kilowatts hour monthly are receiving the solar panel, and we are discounting the subsidy for that family and transforming that to acquire the technology and assure that not only you are investing on the transformation for the use of solar rooftop in household, but also you are shortening the process of maintaining subsidies in the governmental budget. As an example, I also want to highlight that during that process of evaluating new policies to really reduce the emissions, something that we need to work more on, mainly in the Caribbean zone, is how we are going to enforce and to increase the resiliency of our energy infrastructure. We know that climate change is here. We know that before stabilizing our climate is going to be a little bit harder, yearly, daily, we are living that. And to be able, again, to save life, the hospitals, clinics, our household have to assure to have access to energy, to electricity. And in that evaluation that we did in Carbon Zero study for Latin America, we evaluate and define that Latin America and the Caribbean has to invest more than $300 million to adapt to this new climate scenario. But it's important also to highlight that the benefit of using renewable energy for Latin America and the Caribbean on to 2050, that means more than 800 million US dollars for all of our countries. So how do we transform numbers to reality? Radical cooperation. We cannot do this alone. We have not only to share knowledge, to share new practices, but also share our innovation capacity, social capacity. We need to assure that all the talent that live in men and women are put into implementation phase to assure that this transformation that we want is not only to be remaining in paper, in studies, it's going to be something livable. But to do that, we need to work together.
Thank you so much for that presentation. And we move on to some guided questions. And my first guided question is to Professor Moore. Professor Moore, we know that Barbados has set an ambitious target to become a 100% renewable and carbon neutral island state by 2030. All right? As we examine fostering renewable energy uptake in Caribbean small island developmental states, please share with us some lessons and insights from Barbados.
So I think a couple of the things that I mentioned in the presentation would really be quite useful here. The fact that Barbados has a tax incentive regime that really supports the uptake of renewable energy. So you can write off the cost of the purchase of your solar water heater. Mm-hmm. You can write off the cost of up to $10,000, the cost of your solar PV system. The inputs into any renewable energy system as well too, they usually come in duty-free. So the entire tax regime is sort of scheduled to support investment in this area. And then there are also grants available for businesses as well as individuals. So the Ministry of Energy, through their SMART Fund, supports investment by businesses in enhancing the energy efficiency as well as investment in renewable energy as well. So I think what we've been doing so far is supporting the investment by the private sector in this area, but we need to have a sort of a greater take-up of some various other aspects of the industry. So we need a greater take-up of wind energy coming onto the system, and we also need a greater investment in the area of solar storage for the use of renewable energy within the system as well. My colleagues here made some really great points in relation to community networks and community grids. It's an area that really hasn't been discussed within Barbados. We still are very much tied to the large-scale utility grid, and it largely is related to the fact that we're so small. And the notion of a community grid in a small state might not be economically feasible, but it is something that still can use some further exploration as well. So,
thank you so much for that response. Anyone else want to jump in here? Anyone of the panelists want to say anything?
Yes, I'm happy to say also that we share some similar goals with Barbados. As an example, for distributed generation, Panama has a goal to achieve 15% of the total generation of electricity in Panama has to come from rooftop in 2030. And doing this evaluation, we discovered that that market has a value of $2 billion. After we did the analysis, we shared that information with the local banks, and then 16 of the 50 banks that are in Panama are already offering financial facilities to implement distributed generation solar in Panama. And it's also happening the same thing with electromobility. At the beginning, and I don't know if that happens the same here in Barbados, but the general population thinks and believes that solar electricity coming to your house is a luxury, that electric vehicles also are a luxury. But after, and that happened just in 3 years, after having a clear conversation with clear numbers with the banks, we have increased in 80% the installed capacity in distributed generation in Panama. I think that is very, very important and fundamental in order to make the technology to penetrate not only middle class, but also the general class in our countries.
Okay, thank you for that response. Anybody else? You all are good? All right. Professor Thompson, okay, when we examine some of the existing disparities in energy across Caribbean nations, can you tell us about whether community-led renewable energy projects provide clean energy access at the scale required?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's some interesting points of discussion today about, I think a lot of countries in this region already have good rates of electrification. Obviously, it's very uneven. We look at kind of Haiti and countries like that where, it's a much poorer kind of set of electrification, particularly when we get out to rural, isolated communities. I think where there's real potential for decentralized and particularly kind of community-owned renewable energy is precisely in those kind of currently underserved or kind of marginalized communities. I think it's really about been able to make the kind of political case, as kind of Rosie was alluding to, really adding up all of the different costs, or even the costs of inaction. What are we losing out by having kind of remote communities not able to have reliable, clean forms of energy, not only sort of the health impacts, but thinking about kind of education, work, and so on. So I do think it's possible, but I think a lot of the barriers are not necessarily technical, in my opinion. I think they're more kind of regulatory, financial, and really kind of political willingness. So yes, but we need to kind of tear things up and start over a little bit, I would say.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes. I totally agree with Harriet in this regard. And also, I do think that as an engineer, I have learned from my social scientists and humanities colleagues that emotions and feelings play a very important role in community, in energy communities or community energy. The play of the words is always a catch, because we first have to understand where we are and what type of what is energy used and needed for in each community? What's the potential of the community? And that has a lot to do with not only what they have or not have, but what they want to have and how they feel about it. Because energy is a means to a different way of living, a different way of accessing things. And it enables vulnerability in a different way. So it enables them enables persons to get to a different state in life. So having this reflection has to do face to face and has to be done prior to rolling out technology, because there are a lot of examples of technology being rolled out, and maybe an autonomous system in an isolated region with batteries, and batteries finally they burn out, or their lifespan is short because they're cheaper, and then a whole community that didn't have any electricity access has perfect access with batteries, and then the batteries they age, and then they get to a state that is worse than the state they were beforehand, because they have energy and they don't have energy, and then there is a big issue. And also disparities. There is not enough money to be able to roll out these solutions to all the isolated communities. So how are you going to prioritize who's receiving the benefit or who's working with the benefit? And then you can create really strong negative emotions between persons in a whole community because they have the access or not the access. So just like thinking of energy communities has a lot to do with governance, with cultural organization, with social issues, but finally, with emotions and feelings and community emotions and feelings. And that is a work that, as I like it a lot, because in the title of your department, you work with that. You have the span from governance to psychology. So I think that that's all needed, plus the engineers, and that's the way I think that they should be rolled out. But we have to do that work, as Rosie said, together. If not, the things are not going to work well. And then we're going to vaccinate people against renewable energies solutions. So we have to be very mindful about it. No?
I just would like to add something additional that really keep me up at night. Assuming that resources is not the problem, we have the money. Are we sure that we are going to deliver the implementation of all of these systems on time before 2030? How many professionals do we need? Do we have it in our country? If not, are we sure where they are? We have enough time to prepare the community and to bring all the different materials that we need to the community? Assuming that is yes, then what happens when the amount of professionals is not specifically located there? You are bringing people with different cultures to have, they also have necessities. They need food there. The population is going to be able to prepare that, to cultivate that in order to have that amount of population installing the equipment there for how many time? What happened with the waste disposal of all these additional persons in the community, in rural areas, in protected areas? Are we ready to do that? Are we doing the accountability of making that compliant with that goal in 5 years? we need to evaluate more, and as you said, we need to prioritize how we are going to distribute this logistic of implementing that goal.
Thank you so much. Something to think about. Yes. So I move now to Dr. Carla Sedano. And Dr. Sedano, as we examine the role of renewable energy in addressing energy poverty, can you tell us whether community-led renewable energy projects provide clean energy access at the scale required?
I do think that it can be done, but of course, everything is in the how you do it. Because energy poverty is not only another name for poverty, because sometimes it's misunderstood like that. Like, well, there are so many poverties in our countries that now it's multidimensional, now it's economic, now it's energy poverty. No? What other type of poverty do you want to put on top of us? So instead of looking at it as only the problem, I think that energy poverty gives us a solution to bypass the economic issues of poverty. Because sometimes attaining energy, of course you need money. I'm not going to say it's for free, but it entails a lot more than giving people money or a subsidy to be able to access energy. It entails understanding the final end of energy and then working energy literacy. And then being able to fully understand what energy is for. And that makes more sense. And where are you from? For example, if you are in a region that has a very high climate, your needs and your logic on energy is very different from a very, let's say, a humid climate instead of a dry one. Or also if it's cold in the nights or extreme temperatures. And you have also to think in climate change and how it's making more extreme the temperatures and how we didn't have any cold in our countries. Now we have extreme cold sometimes and extreme heat. So those types of thinking are the ones that are going to move us to a local moment and to stop thinking that one solution fits all. We will say, no, every community, and as you micromanage the community, you can entail a better dress on that community. You can design a better dress for that specific community, and then you can alleviate energy poverty, create a better state of well-being, and then productivity is in another place. Well-being is another place. And yes, you put money in the community, but for energy purposes. You put a better, let's say, a better step for development. You only gave money and with a different agenda. No? So I think that energy is a means to be able to work things out better. No?
Thank you so much. Anybody else want to contribute?
Yeah, while you were talking, it made me think of some of my biggest frustrations with policy frameworks, and especially an earlier project I did establishing a monitoring observatory for the European Commission on energy poverty. And I remember in the very first meeting we were sat there and they said, okay, we want one indicator, just one. And we were like, well, no, you can't have that. Sorry. And then eventually we negotiated to kind of 4 overarching ones, which was quite a negotiating down from our side. And I think one of the key issues is that there's always a pressure to simplify and to standardize. So precisely what you were saying about, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for, I'd say that probably never exists for any kind of complex social issue, but especially in the case of energy, because as we've sort of seen in some of the exercises we're doing this morning, we all have very different ways of using and interacting with energy. It does different things for our lives. So that's one of my biggest frustrations, is the way that there's always a tendency to simplification in our governance frameworks, in the kind of indicators that underpin it for monitoring progress. And I think if we're very, if we're serious about reaching a just energy future, then we really need a wholesale rethink of the underpinning monitoring kind of frameworks and the indicators. So I live with some hope at the moment that maybe the sort of the next stage after SDGs will be something even more complex. And I think we've seen that kind of evolution. So yeah, that would just be my 2 cents.
for access to electricity, for energy, we need to recognize that the energy base load in the areas that doesn't have access to energy now shouldn't give you or lead you to energy poverty. No, we have to plan accordingly to the community's necessities. We need to skip that from not having energy to energy poverty, and maybe in the future then energy equality. No, we have the opportunity now to skip that path. We must do. That should be justice in energy planning.
Thank you so much. Yes, Professor Moore, you wanted to add something to this?
One of the things that we haven't really been discussing as well, though, is the price component. So we've just been speaking about, the notion of adding more renewable energy, but adding renewable energy does not necessarily result in a reduction in prices for persons that have not invested in a renewable energy system. So if I have a PV system on my rooftop, I benefit from that because my electricity bill falls, or I can sell electricity to the grid. But for individuals who haven't been able to invest in the grid, then they're somewhat penalized because they're not benefiting from the incentive structure that we have. And one of the things we've been discussing in Barbados is how do we reduce electricity prices while also incentivizing persons to invest more in renewable energy. And the framework that we have in place right now, and it was implemented, I think, maybe last year, was that once you invest in the system at year one, and the return on your investment is guaranteed for that period of time. And so therefore it encourages investors, but it also encourages new investment to come onto the grid. So purchasing a PV system maybe a couple of years ago was a lot more expensive than it was now. So getting newer systems onto the grid would therefore push down the price of electricity for the utility scale producer. The second thing I wanted to mention as well is the notion of energy communities might look different. I think Harriet mentioned this just now. Within the Caribbean, maybe energy communities might be supported by our credit unions. So the credit unions might help some communities invest in community storage or community PV systems. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the typical concept of communities that don't have access to electricity, because the electrification rate within the Caribbean is quite high. So what is actually needed is more support for communities to invest in renewable energy. So therefore credit unions and other community type organizations become quite important. So that might be a different perspective to the whole notion of community-based energy.
Thank you so much, Professor Moore, for that response. We move on to Engineer Rosalina Lindo-Riggs. And can you tell us some of the existing disparities in energy access across Caribbean nations and strategies that can be employed for ensuring the energy transitions do not exacerbate existing inequalities?
That's a wonderful and a tough question, I have to say, because we have a variety of realities. We have a variety of renewable resources to produce and use energy and electricity. It's very diverse, our country bases energy matrix. Some have more sun-based matrix, water-based matrix, fossil fuel matrix. Those disparities are there, but looking forward to the future, what I see is that all of our country have a little bit of sun, a little bit of wind, and in order to assure, I'm talking about also about the first part of your presentation when you say that the infrastructure to connect the Caribbean is different than in Latin America, we have an opportunity of producing green hydrogen and green hydrogen derivatives to not only be thinking about exporting electrons, about exporting molecules, and also assuring that this decarbonization process is not going to force the Caribbean countries to be also producing, using their soil to produce everything of the different type of fuels that we are expecting in the decarbonization path. What I mean right now is that if we utilize our changing energy geopolitics to unify as Latin American and the Caribbean countries using the competitive advantage of the Caribbean and the other countries that have more potential to produce electricity with the sun, as Mexico, as Chile, as Argentina, using also the platform of the Panama Canal to cut the pass-through of all the different fuels. Now we can be assuring a new, what I call, treaty, where we are going to be assuring that the Caribbean also receive green hydrogen, green ammonia, e-methanol, e-kerosene to replace the fossil fuel that we are using right now. We have different size of country, and we need to be producing food, yes, and we need to save our water as well. So in the way that we create this common platform of collaboration and prosperity to assure that all of our countries have their energy necessities covered, then we are going to be able to talk in a just and inclusive energy transition. We cannot force, as an example, Barbados to produce 3 million tons of green hydrogen as Denmark is planning. No, you have different resources. You need to assure this radical honesty. We are going to be able to produce as this. This is our national circumstances. But then how you are able to bring cooperation to assure that the new clean fuel that the Latin American is going to be producing is not only going to be sold in Europe or in Asia, needs to come here too, needs to come to Jamaica, needs to come in a way, for me, is like building new energy solidarity, not only thinking about interconnected grid systems country by country, but a new way of logistics for assuring that, yes, fossil fuel in 20 years is going to be used much, much less, but the replacement have to be also coming to our countries.
Thank you so much, Rosalina.
Just one other thing. I think there's a really good point that was made in that we have to use our local resources to support the transition to renewable energy. And one of the biggest areas that we're going to have to struggle with in terms of the transition is going to be transportation. Transportation is essentially made up of fossil fuels, diesel and gasoline, right? And the University of West Indies provides a really good illustration of what you can do with local resources. We have a company that came out of the University of West Indies called Rum and Sargassum. And that company utilizes the waste product from rum, utilizes sargassum to generate biogas that can then fuel and power the traditional vehicles with a little bit of augmentation. And that type of innovation is the innovation that we would need to see taking place if we're going to transition those big industries like transportation. And it's the type of technology that we can share with other islands within the Caribbean, and we do want to share the technology as a university. And these are the type of local home-based solutions that we'll need to see coming forward.
Thank you so much, Professor Moore. Anyone else wanted to add anything?
I think that it's inevitable to go to the economic side of things because finally money moves transitions or not transitions, no, and geopolitics. But I do think that we also talked about this in the workshop. when we make this like accounting system, we forget externalities when we talk about fossil fuels. Nobody talks about the externalities really in depth of the hydrocarbon-based economy, because it goes further than pollution, on that health issues, disparities, the inequalities that the geopolitics of hydrocarbon-based economy has brought to us is the main thing that has us like this. That's the reason that Latin America and Africa have such immense difficulties, and there's this energy burden that in some cases is energy slavery, and we don't account for it. We say, but it's fossil fuels. But when we talk about renewable energy, I know the minerals. I know it contaminates. What are you going to do with the lithium? And then everything is like, wait, let's make a better way of accounting for those externalities. We don't deny it, but we should account for them better. And also, for me, the great danger is in the mini nuclear reactors, because they seem to be a solution, but they pose a lot of negative externalities that are hidden, and then they're like, no, they have a mini reactor. And with climate change and with the vulnerability that we have, those are the worst possible solutions. And something that economists have taught me is the cost of opportunity. If you invest $1 on the wrong decision-making, then you're not investing it in the right decision-making. So all this analysis, economics have the tools. The rest of the disciplines have to help to say, well, wait a minute. Health impacts can be monetized this way. And I hate monetizing, but it's the language that investments understand, no? That politicians understand. So I think that we have to do that.
It's wonderful. I just want to add one more example that we are working on right now in Panama. We are building our green hydrogen and derivative hub in order not only to produce green hydrogen, but also to storage green hydrogen fuels. And we want to become the place to be as Central American and Caribbean reserve, to assure that if you are producing or selling or looking forward to have a specific provider, you can find that in Panama. The producer in Chile can storage that there, also sell it to the maritime sector, or move it to somewhere else. We want to be that safe place for making a balance. If you are a small country or a big country, you will have an opportunity to access to the market there. And 1 month ago, the Panama Canal Authority made the announcement of a new a new tender for January 2025. For the first time, the users of the Panama Canal are going to have the opportunity to buy the pass through the Panama Canal in a very low price if they are transporting clean fuels, or if they are moving the ships and vessels with clean fuels. If you prove to be efficient, then you have a more speedy pass through the Panama Canal and a better tariff. That is sending the signal that you can use the Panama Canal for reducing and decarbonizing also the maritime sector. That means that if any country in the Caribbean is also producing, have a better and a cheaper access to the seller if passed through the Panama Canal.
Thank you so much, and congratulations to Panama for that. Yes, but I know everybody is waiting with bated breath to ask questions, so we're going to open the floor now, and there's a mic in the middle. We'll take at least 3 questions from the audience, and don't be shy. Come on. Let's go.
Hello. So my question is for Professor Moore. So you mentioned that Barbados would lose out on a couple million when we reach the 100% renewable energy and everything. What are the likely economic implications for that? Because we want the green energy, but we also don't want a fallout of society. So would we see possibly a hike in VAT a hike in income tax or other areas?
Okay, so let me just repeat the question in case you didn't hear. His question is, as we transition to renewable energy, we're going to lose tax revenues, and what will be the implications of that transition? The good thing for you is that if you want to read up a little bit more on it, I did a IDB working paper on this topic, so you could just search on the IDB website for the working paper that I did, which gives you a lot more details that I'm going to give you right now. Essentially, there are a couple of things that we will have to do as we transition to renewable energy. We'll need to find alternative sources of revenue, unfortunately. And alternative sources of revenue always mean higher taxes. That's why I said unfortunately. So in that paper, what we've suggested is that the first thing that you should do, and I think this is what Rosalina would have mentioned, the first thing that you should do is try to get rid of the subsidies that we have on fossil fuels first. So that, yes, you're losing revenues, but you're getting rid of any subsidies that we might be paying to support fossil fuels. The second thing that we suggested in that paper that we might want to do as well is that we might want to encourage a greater investment in alternative industries. And that greater investment in alternative renewable energy industries is going to generate additional economic activity, and that economic activity is going to lead to greater tax revenues in the future as well. So those are sort of like the solutions that don't hurt as much. The other solutions that might hurt a little bit might include increasing taxes in other areas that might not be as popular with the population. So that would include looking at things such as your value-added tax and other excise taxes in Barbados as well. But we sort of focused a lot more on looking at the subsidies that we provide to fossil fuels. That was the first thing that we were suggesting. And then secondly, the additional economic activity should lead to greater tax revenues as well. But if those things don't lead to additional revenue, then you would have to look at other tax solutions as well.
Thank you for that response, Professor Moore. Come on, any more questions?
Shorty. Good evening. I want to say that I am really enjoying the information that I've been hearing today. I took some time last night to prepare for you today. So I want to just address something here. So I understand that the energy injustice in the Caribbean refers to the unequal access to energy resources, the impact of energy policies on different communities, and the environmental and social consequences of energy production and use in the region. I also understand that countries in the Eastern Caribbean are among the world's most energy insecure nations. And policies and governance is very important. Shorty. Policies and governance is very important in being able to move forward with trying to get these changes that you all have stipulated today are going to be necessary. Have you all found that the countries, the leaders, are willing to work with you all, not you all, but work to get these different steps that need to be taken to make these changes happen? Are you finding that they're really coming together? Because I listen sometimes, and it seems to me that some of the leaders don't even know the information that you have. So, are they able to come together to get these steps formulated?
Okay.
I love the question. It touched a sensitive nerve for me. Because in order to bring everybody in the discussion and in the real tangible actions, we pass through a process of transforming every single decision and goal that we had into numbers. How that impact the creation of jobs, we had it. How that impact the growth of the gross domestic product, we prepare it. How we can support the savings on subsidies on also education, how we were able to create a better development in our country. And we found some allies. I have to say that the Ministry of Environment was a good ally, the Ministry of Education was a good ally, the Ministry of Commerce and Industry was a great ally. The different commerce chambers in Panama were wonderful allies. We found as an ally the government of Denmark, the government of United States, the government of Dominican Republic, also Barbados. I have to say that the embassy of Barbados in Panama is the top. But at the same time, we found out that even though that we have so many allies, international organizations and banks outside the country were our good fighters, soldiers against this injustice in transition into sustainable energy. Okay, I will say something not politically correct, but we found like a big closing door in our face in the Ministry of Economy and Finance. So as I was saying in the workshop before, we were able to bring 2.8 billion US dollars for the Ministry of Economy and Finance because we prepare, design, and deliver a energy transition policy, and we were implementing that. We bring the money to the table, and that money was to invest in the creation of infrastructure for the energy transition. But they decided to use the money for something else. So for me, that means that we need more allies to assure that the decision-making process that our governments are doing is going to remain there. And one of the things that I'm looking forward to push in my new role next week is to assure that the international cooperation and the different two levels banks that are supporting the countries have a more strong clause forcing the commitment to remain in the coming years. That's very important. It doesn't matter what you put in the paper. You need to deliver. And in order to deliver, if you have different institutions with different levels of power, Ministry of Economy and Finance has the highest power in the government. That has to be your ally. If they are not completely following the same path, you can move forward, but not as the speed as we need to.
Thank you so much.
Deborah,
Go ahead, Professor Moore.
yeah, just one other thing as well too. In terms of the support from the political level, there is a CARICOM energy policy, which has been endorsed by the ministers, which sort of pushes us in the direction of renewable energy. Every single Caribbean island also has a development plan that encourages or supports the transition to greater renewable energy as well. So there is a lot of buy-in to this notion of renewable energy within the Caribbean. If you look at the policy documents and you look at what each Caribbean island is doing, various countries are moving ahead faster than others in particular areas. So, for example, Jamaica does a lot in the area of wind energy. And their regulatory framework is very advanced in the area of wind energy and selling electricity to the grid in that way. The Eastern Caribbean islands, it's interesting that you mentioned them as well too as being energy insecure. Some of those countries utilize a bit more energy from rivers and so on to generate energy as well. But there's also another aspect of the transition that is still problematic for the region as a whole, and that is the macro level transition. So it's fine for households to purchase a solar water heater, But when a country like Barbados needs to do a major investment in storage, that is something that can't be handled at the household level. It can't even be handled at the private sector level. It needs major foreign direct investment. And so therefore we need our partners from the international donor community, as well as partners from international investors as well, to help us push and propel the industry forward. Because even though the Caribbean is responsible for a very small proportion of CO2 emissions, there's still a lot of pressure on Caribbean countries to reform their energy usage and their electricity production structures. And so our argument has always been, if you want this transition for the Caribbean, we really need your support in terms of investment in the industry, because you're asking Caribbean islands to recover from hurricanes every couple of years and spend that investment. And you're also asking us to invest in renewable energy systems as well, which is also another investment that they have to make. So it's it's a catch-22 situation that you have to look at in the Caribbean as a whole. But there is a lot of buy-in from Caribbean leaders.
Thank you so much for that response. One more question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that interesting panel discussion. My name is Alois. I'm from the Caribbean Environmental Law Unit. My boss is behind me, so I have to say something nice. But my question... Turn up the mic. Oh, yeah. Sorry. There you go. Yeah. I do have a number of questions, but I'm going to point to Professor Harriet. So when you actually read the European Renewable Energy Directive, Article 2.16, which actually defines energy cooperatives, from our side, as the Global South, I'm African, I'm from Zimbabwe, we kind of understand energy cooperatives than energy communities. So I don't get the difference some of the time. So I really wanted an explanation on that. Then you touched on something on decentralized. These are decentralized models. Now you are talking about real rights. You are now talking about people owning energy, people sharing energy, people governing their own energy, and also planning for that energy. So in a way, we have removed the government from their duties. That's another naughty question that I had. Then what's the role of the government? But in this model now, what will be the legal vehicles? Are we now talking about the right to energy as a human right? Or we are talking about energy justice as a form of a governance model?
Okay, panelists?
Yeah, well, there's a lot in there, so I'll try my best. I'll start from newest told us. Okay, so I think that question of energy as a form of a human right, I think it's gained a lot of traction with campaigners, campaign groups, and you see a lot of these kind of slogans. There's a very kind of prolific pan-European group who kind of campaign for energy as a human right. But I think it's very tricky, and it starts to take us down the path of having to define how we use energy. And I think that's where it gets messy, because we all use differently, and it's very culturally embedded. And how do you set the limit? Where do you set the limit? Is it a fixed amount of kilowatt hours? Is it, 10 kilos of wood? Or, it gets very tricky. And I think whenever you start to set those limits, they have a tendency, policy has a tendency of being very sticky, and it doesn't change. So we've seen that, for example, with definitions of energy poverty or fuel poverty in the UK. A definition that was set in the 90s didn't change for about 30 years. And it was one that was very problematic and had a lot of flaws, but it was just incredibly enduring. And I think that's where, for me, I'm always a little hesitant to say that, yes, it should be a human right. But I do think that we need to have better protections and better kind of legal recourse for protecting people and ensuring access to clean, reliable, safe forms of energy. I'm just not sure that kind of necessarily the human rights framework is necessarily the best approach for that. I think on the point about definitions, I completely agree. It's just we get into all sorts of loops of all these different definitions: energy vulnerability, energy precarity, fuel poverty, energy poverty, and to some extent, I'm like, okay, that I think it's just creating noise and distracting discussions. On the other hand, I have been someone who's a real proponent for definitions. I think that they serve a purpose of increasing visibility of an issue. I've been pushing for a definition in EU legislation for well over a decade, for 13, 14 years now. It was good to finally see it put into practice, written into a fixed kind of enforceable legislation. It got watered down, obviously. But I think there's a balance to be struck between having something that can help guide and give visibility, but then also getting too stuck and it becomes something that prevents progress. And I think it's really difficult to draw that line, but that's something that has to be developed at as local a scale as possible. It has to be responding to the local context and needs, would be mine. And there was one in the middle, but I've kind of forgotten what that was, but I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Thompson. Now we'll have some closing remarks, brief closing remarks from the panelists, starting with Professor Moore.
First of all, just a real pleasure to be part of this panel. I thought some really interesting points came out. But in terms of just one thing that I would recommend from my side is we just need to continue to educate the public in relation to the benefits and how they can become part of the transition. That is my final thing.
Thank you.
Conscious that we're stood between this audience and the wine and beer at the back, so I'll keep it very brief to say thank you again. Really, let's continue the discussions. If anyone would like any of the kind of things that I've mentioned, I'm happy to send emails, and thanks again, but just keep the conversations going, keep those cross kind of disciplinary sectoral collaborations going, and I think that's the best path forward, really.
Okay, Dr. Carlo?
Yeah, I think that we should reflect on energy as the greatest enabler. It enables security and safety for women. It enables communication in the night for the deaf community. That's something that my daughter taught me, and I always think of that. What happens when the deaf community goes without light at the night? They cannot communicate between each other. It also enables mental health to the divergencies, neurodivergencies, gender diversities, mental health, communication. We need it, and energy enables that. So I think that that's something that we should rely on. Energy is too important just to leave it to the politicians and to the economics and to the finance. It's part of what we have to decide for ourselves and our future. And yes, I think that the education goes two ways. I'm more on the idea that the public has to educate me on what energy is and what do they need it for. So us as researchers can do something that is enabling the possibilities that energy gives us. No?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Dr. Lindo?
wonderful. I think that all of you stole my reflections. But what I wanted to highlight is that energy justice means involvement. If we want, as you said in your question, which is the level of decentralization that we want, you have to be there in the discussions and create with the policymakers, with the politics that is involved in that. If we want to assure that real success is going to be bringing by sustainable energy transition, means that we need to bring all the talent of everybody, even the person that doesn't understand what energy is. We need those people because, yes, when you are seeing the problem from abroad, maybe your considerations are bringing the solution that the expert cannot see because are looking just like this. This is important. Your opinion has a wonderful and a powerful value. So don't be shy and bring it to the table. And together we are going to be enjoying a sustainable future with justice. Don't forget that. Your opinion has an enormous value.
Thank you so much to the panelists. Let's appreciate them. Thank you so much for your contributions. Now we'll have the vote of thanks by Dr. Alana Griffith.
Good evening, everyone. Before delivering my vote of thanks, I wish to invite the president of the Barbados Renewable Energy Association, Ms. Felicia Cox, to just give a brief comment.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I regret now not having been able to come to the workshop today, but hopefully I'll be able to meet all of you all properly tomorrow. I'm a registered engineer here in Barbados, and I've been working in energy and renewables since 2010, and in the construction industry before that. So I have a lot of experience, hands-on and otherwise, dealing with things like legislation and regulation. And there's so many things you guys said that I could literally talk about what has happened and what is happening here in Barbados. But the one thing that I will state that relates to this issue has to do about how we're financing renewable energy and one of the opportunities here. Credit unions and cooperatives have a very long history here in Barbados. To me, the idea starts with what people call the SUSU, or the meeting turn, where you pool money together in order to pay for some expense you have down the road. And the cooperatives is kind of that same mentality. Here in Barbados, from jump, we've been pushing the idea that we have to have local investment in renewables. And what has come out of that within the last few years is an entity called Co-op Energy. It is a cooperative. And it is, because of the way that credit unions here are structured, it has been seeking the buy-in of credit unions. And the reason for that is probably the vast majority of Barbadians have a credit union account here in Barbados. So if most of the credit unions invest in Co-op Energy, and Co-op Energy invests in the large renewable energy projects, it means that we can find a way for almost every person in the country, regardless of their ultimate financial capability, to have some kind of stake. You could have 5 cents in a credit union, and you have a stake. If you're getting dividends, you have a stake. And so as a result, that is one of the ways in which the idea of energy injustice is being tackled in a place where we have 99% electrification, and therefore we don't have the same challenges of rural energy poverty that other countries may have. So I'll end there because I'm not standing in the way of refreshments, but of course that's a conversation I'm willing to have with any of the audience members or any of the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now I feel under pressure to be the one to stand in the way of refreshments. But this evening, I do stand to give the vote of thanks, and I'm minded of a Thai proverb that translates to: gratitude towards those who have been benevolent to you is a merit, a great virtue. So I'm honored to have merited this duty to thank those without whose benevolence tonight would not have been possible. I wish to thank the campus registrar and his office for granting permission to host this discussion and the two-day workshop. Thanks to the head of department, Dr. Christina Hines, and staff of the Department of Government Sociology and Social Work and Psychology. And special thanks to Ms. Alexandra Tillett and other administrative staff for their support. Thanks to the United Kingdom Economic and Social Research Council for funding the Energy Solidarity in Latin America project. Our gratitude goes to the S Latina, in the interest of time, network for selecting the UE Cave Hill and the GSSWP, see I'm cutting out words, and trusting us as partners to provide the launch pad for the expansion into the English-speaking Caribbean. We offer appreciation to the director and staff of the Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business for accommodating this week's activities. Thanks to the University of Glasgow for partnering with us here at the UE. For those of you joining us virtually and here in person, tonight's broadcast would not have been possible without the kind assistance of the director and staff of the UWITV. So special thanks to the UWITV. I am aware that I am probably speaking longer. I did say I'll speed it up. But please bear with me. Thank you to Dr. Deborah Joseph for so ably moderating tonight's discussion, and to our panelists who have certainly provided us and provoked us to examine more deeply, provided us with a wealth of information and provoked us to examine more deeply the topic of energy injustice in the Caribbean. Thanks to the Office of Marketing and Communications for publicizing and covering tonight's event. And thanks to the members of the media, to campus security, and finally to you, the audience, joining us here in person and joining us virtually. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr.